Hi everyone, welcome back to Total War Therapy, and today we're gonna analyze every single unit from the Tzeentch unit roster. We will see how they perform in battle and we will decide if they are worthy to recruit just for fun or situational or niche. Say that, saying thank you so much for reaching the 20,000 subscribers to this channel. It's a dream coming true. I'm sorry I didn't answer so much the comments lately, but I will recover and let's begin. Hi, I'm Alberto, I'm a real person, and here you will find the beginner's guide, the battle unit roster, tier list, ranking, and many shorts. So if you wanna support the channel, please consider to subscribe. Let's start with the legendary lords, and of course the first legendary lords is Kairos Fateweaver. That is an insanely powerful spellcaster, not that great in melee, at least compared to the other lords of change, because by lore one head can see the future, the other head can see the past, so in some way he misses to see the present to have a proper fight. In any case, with the new mechanics that was introduced less than 1 year ago, in case you haven't played the game since a long time, now you got access to any spells from any lords of magic. You can choose them in whichever selection you prefer. That it's a very cool mechanics, unfortunately just for this character, and it's very funny because of course you can, in any different battle, you can choose whatever you want to have something of the lore of fire, with the lore of metal, with the lore of Nargle, with the lore of death. Everything, just everything, and it's so powerful. And then he got access to some abilities that I would like to mention, just two of them. One that is Oracle of Eternity, that increase the damage resistance, that as you know is very fragile, so it may need it. And the Gaze of Fate, that it's very powerful because it can prevent the enemy to move and it reduce drastically his melee attack. So overall it's a huge beast, but don't consider it like a monster. He's just a very strong spellcaster, and that can fly, and so very mobile and very strong. The second legendary lord we're gonna talk about is the Changeling. You can get access to its campaign if you buy the DLC Shadows of Change. Very controversial figure. I will not in this video talk about its campaign, so just let's focus on the character and on how it performs in battle. He's a spellcaster of Tzeentch that can get the Stalk attribute in the campaign, so quite stealthy. He's a little fast for a grounded unit, and then in melee is not that terrible. I mean, compared to Kairos, at least is not a huge monster, so it takes less damage than Kairos, and at the same time, I mean, he can deal some damage himself. Then he got, that is, I mean, the most important ability, the Formless Horror, where he can basically turn in whichever character you want. In this case, we can transform it into Scarbrand. So yeah, he can be a very strong damage dealer monster, or you know, you can be an assassin, you can be a monster hunter, you can choose to be whatever you want, and this is, I think, the most funny peculiarity and a good reason to take this DLC. The third and last legendary lord for now is Village the Curseling. He doesn't have a Tzeentch campaign in Immortal Empires, but I wanted to include it into the video because you can still use it into the multiplayer, and then, I mean, it's quite Tzeentch, we can say. It's one of my favorite characters for the lore, because he's a tank warrior, very strong, without armor piercing damage, but don't worry, it's not a big problem. It's very damaging, and then is a spellcaster too. I mean, his twins that he's on his back, and it's great because you can have in the Tzeentch roster that you have to understand that before Shadows of Change we didn't have heavy armored characters, so it was quite unique because we got just him and Echoed Hellbreath as tanky characters. But in case of the Village, is also a spellcaster, so you can you know, bait all the enemies around you and then cast a powerful Tzeentch spell to destroy the enemy army. Now let's talk about the legendary heroes, and let's start with the Blue Scribes. One of the funniest character in this game. You need the Shadows of Change DLC to get access to it. In any case, it's this couple of dudes on a giant screamer of Tzeentch that they can fly around, fire these little magical bolts. But the most interesting and funny feature about them is that they get access to a random selection of spells. Every time you cast a spell, this selection will be changed, will be renovated, and this means that you should get to know all the lores of magic if you want to play with this unit properly. Otherwise you can just have fun, look at the selection, choose a spell and cast it, and it's very funny. I don't know why it's not a legendary lord. I really wanted to play a campaign just with them. The second legendary hero, and in this case you can get it for free as a DLC, is called Hellbrass. That is a melee specialist, quite weird in the Tzeentch roster, and as I said, it was introduced before the second patch of Shadows of Change, so it was very unique in this roster. He got plenty of armor with the shield, even if it doesn't have the shield, but he can deflect arrows with the swords. He got melee attack and melee defense very high, especially the attack. This means that he's more a duelist, an assassin. A lot of weapon strength, specialized with in heavy infantry, so characters as well. And then he got some abilities, a magical missile that he can throw at the foe, then a kind of a spell of the lore of magic of light, I think, where he creates a big trees that can replenish the hit points of the enemy, and I mean many stuff like that. It's very funny. You can use it as a bait to cast a big spell, and yeah, I quite love it. Now let's talk about the generic lords that are available in the base game. We're gonna talk about the ones of the DLCs later in the video. So let's start with the Herald of Tzeentch, that got access to both the lore of metal and to the lore of Tzeentch. He's very bad in melee, as you can expect, and he got this range missile attack that is not that powerful, but it's a funny extra. In any case, he can get access to two mounts, the disc and the burning chariot, that are flying discs that I mean, they're very fast, and they really need it because they're actually quite fast even for the flying mounts themselves, so they can escape troubles and hard situations. And it's the same at the same time they can move around quite easily to cast their spells. It's your only option in the base game, so it's not about if it's worth to recruit or not. You have to do it. So yeah, quite great, and I mean it quite respect the Tzeentch feeling. When you upgrade your Herald to a certain level, you can turn into an Exalted Lord of Change. That is the Flying Monster version of that. You don't need the mount anymore since you're a monster and you can fly. And I mean, you are better at casting spells, and you're even quite good in melee. I mean, compared to Kairos Fateweaver. About the generic heroes, the first one is the Iridescent Horror. That is basically the generic hero version of the Herald of Tzeentch. He got access to the disc, to the burning chariot, he can cast spell, and he got this missile attack. The second and last generic hero that you get with the base game is the Cultist of Tzeentch, another wizard, but this time with access to the lore of fire that is a little more aggressive. You can choose between a couple of mounts, the steed in case you want more mobility, but at the same time remember that you can be fast but but very fragile, and or the Chaos War Shrine that in this case maybe you get access only if you have the Champions of Chaos DLC, I'm not sure. That is a big altar tank that you sacrifice a little of mobility, but you get more health and more damage. In any case, you can the best ability of the cultist in I mean all the monogods is that they can summon a unit of horrors, I mean multiple times, and when you upgraded them with the skill trees, even a greater demon. And this is huge. I mean, you can summon a Lord of Change that can bring havoc to the battlefield, and I mean it's quite nice for just a guy with a bird mask. Now let's address the most iconic category of units of Tzeentch. I'm talking about the horrors that are basically this hybrid infantry that will be the bread and butter for your campaign. Let's start with the blue horrors that are the most low tier version. Their missile attack is very limited because the range is short and the ammunition are just 4, but believe me, in the early campaign you will not feel it. I mean, they will have enough missile power to deal a lot of damage, especially to other missile infantry in your enemy roster, enemy armies and so on. In melee, they are not that great. They work more as a mid shield, and they are very functional because, as you can see, their formation is very wide. In this way, they slow down on the enemy that attack them a lot. Their leadership is very low, so be careful because they are demon and they will start to take damage, to cause damage to themselves when they lose leadership. In any way, they are best filler you can ever ask for the Tzeentch army. The Chromatic Abominations is the Regiment Renown version that is a little better in melee, and then they got plenty more of ammunition. In this case, I mean, you can actually use it as a missile infantry, and then they got this couple of ability that one replenish the barrier points of the allied units, and then they get the 360 missile block chance, so basically they will have a little shield that will block missile attacks from any directions. The pink horrors are the upgraded version of the blue horrors of Tzeentch. They get better in any stats from the armor to the melee capabilities. Their range attack is far better because the range itself it's increased to 130, so like a proper missile infantry, and they got plenty more of ammunition. They reach 20, still with flaming and magical attack. They can work both as a melee unit because they can stand a fight against some low tier melee infantry, and then their missile attack is very powerful, especially for a unit that doesn't cost that much, and of course the range is a little shorter compared to other missile infantry, but believe me, if they start to shoot at a unit, at not very armored units of the enemy, they will tear them apart. It's great, and I would suggest you to fill your Tzeentch army with so many of them. The Sword Guts are the exalted version of the pink horrors, and they basically get this ability called the Sword Discharge, where they explode when the unit fell. That decide if it's worthy. In any case, an ability that if you use the ability, you cannot use the unit anymore. The exalted pink horrors of Tzeentch are the upgraded version of the blue horrors that are of course far better than the pink horrors, more in the melee. Okay, the range attack doesn't change that much, they just get an increase in the missile strength, and then they got an ability where they boost the power recharge of your army when they are out of melee. In this case we are talking about quite an elite unit. Of course it doesn't stand that well the fights against very high tier infantry, but against mid tier melee infantry they do very well, and then their missile attack, as I said, is very awesome. They're a little more expensive, and then you need more turns to recruit them in the campaign, and that is an important factor if you have to consider that these are more bread and butter units. But in any case, a good addition in case you want to upgrade your army. The Blazing Squealers is the Regiment Renown version of the exalted pink horrors, and in this case they got the Warp Flame effect with their range attack that reduced the armor and increased the weakness to fire of the enemy, and then this ability called the Conduit of Infinity that replenished the ammunitions. Unfortunately, the only proper melee infantry that is available in the base game for Tzeentch are the Forsaken, that of course are a reskin from the Warriors of Chaos roster. They are not that defensive, I mean they get some armor but the melee defense is very low, but they got some melee attack and a huge charge bonus for an infantry that together with the Frenzy that increases some stats when the leadership is high and immunity to psychology, it makes all of this it makes them very good for offensive strategies. So not very suitable for protecting your Tzeentch units that, as you know, they are very powerful with a lot of damage, but they are in most of cases weak and fragile, so you need to protect them. So you will recruit a lot of them in the early campaign and even in the late campaign. That's why probably you should consider to take at least one DLC for Tzeentch to get more melee options. The Chaos Knight of Tzeentch are another reskin from the Warriors of Chaos roster. They are this very armored cavalry with the shield, so they will be more protected from missile attack. I mean, they're just invulnerable to arrows, basically. The speed, I mean, they're a little slow because of course they're very heavy compared to other cavalries, of course. The melee defense is actually great because it's 50, and this makes them an actually good front line in case you want to replace the Forsaken of Tzeentch with something more elite. The weapon strength is huge, but it's not ammo piercing. The charge bonus is great, but they are definitely not a shock cavalry. And then they get the Mark of Tzeentch, so they will have, compared to the generic Warriors of Chaos version, the magical attacks and the barrier, that is this magical shield that will protect them from the very first attack. A valuable option if you consider that you don't have many in the base game at least. The Doom Knights of Tzeentch are the quintessence of the Warriors of Chaos of this roster. They get the Mark of Tzeentch that is both the barrier and the magical attacks, the Strider, so they will not suffer penalties caused by terrain, and the Vanguard deployment for more flexible strategies. They got plenty of armor with the shield, so more protected against missile attacks. The speed is great because they are flying, so it's 95, that it's very huge and one of the fastest in the Tzeentch roster. The melee attack and melee defense are great because they are still, even if they are cavalry, they count as a cavalry, they are infantry, okay? But infantry with a good charge bonus of 52, a weapon strength that is very huge with the anti-large bonus. I didn't remember that, but yeah, apparently they are you can use them to chase down cavalries, monsters and the mounted characters. Now, they are very essential in my opinion because they are these bodyguards of the sky, because with Tzeentch you have a lot of wizards, flying wizards that they need extra protection, and they are the best, of course, late campaign options to protect them. The Knights of Immolation are the Regimentary Nano version that they got the Flaming Attack and this crazy ability called the Searing Torrent, that is a bombardment that, it has a cooldown, but it's very powerful. You hit this small area and you can, just make explode bunches of infantry. Now let's start with the category of the Flamers of Tzeentch, that are these very specific monsters in groups of very few entities that are definitely terrible in melee. You have to keep in mind that because, on the card they get the ammo piercing damage, the magical and the fire effect, and they got very nice animations in melee, but yeah, they're just terrible, so try to avoid melee combat. And then, the true strength of this unit is the range attack that got very few ammunition, so be very careful about choosing targets, and the range is very little because there are these flame throwers that they burst this flame around and they incinerate everything they have ahead of them. The missile strength is very high, again with ammo piercing damage, so even suitable for heavy armored infantry, and with the war flame attribute that reduce the armor and increase the weakness to fire. So yeah, overall very great, very powerful, but they need an extra protection from other units. The Exalted Flamer of Tzeentch is just the enhanced single entity version of the Flamers. He's better at any stats, of course, and even in the melee is very terrible as the Flamer, so try to avoid the melee combat as much as possible. His attack, his range attack is a little more different. He got more ammunition and more range. That is great, and is not flamethrower in this case, but is more an kind of an artillery piece, and when its projectiles will hit the target, they will create these little tornadoes that will move around a small area, and they will hit even more infantry. That is a very powerful attack. They changed it over time because before it was not like that, and that's why it was a very terrible unit. But now with this changed, with this different range attack, they are really crazy, really helpful, and they are a little more maneuverable than the Flamers, because being a single entity you can just move around, get hidden, and got protected and so on. The Burning Chariot of Tzeentch is basically the flying version of the Exalted Flamer of Tzeentch. He keeps most of the attribute, but he sacrifices a little of range. But I mean, overall is good because being a flying unit, he can escape situation a little more easily. But yeah, the range is a huge problem, and it got a little less of ammunition, so you have to choose the target more wisely. And being a flying entity, this may be a little more simple because you can just move in one location, shoot a target, then move to another location, shoot to another target. Of course, being a flying unit, they are also more vulnerable to missile attacks and to flying beasts that they are by definition stronger in melee than them. So you need to protect them, you need to take care of them, to babysit them. If you do everything correctly, they can be a very nice option for your late game campaign. And they are very expensive, of course. Now let's address the beast category, and let's start with the Chaos Furies of Tzeentch. That you know that I hate reskins, but I will not criticize them because I think that they're actually nice. They match quite well the air fleet of Tzeentch, that is probably the best in the game, because I mean there are many flying options, and they will be in this case the melee flying infantry. In any case, they get the barrier, that is a cool attribute in this case, because when you charge, when you send them to attack a missile infantry, the missile infantry will shoot at you some arrows and you will be protected, okay, thanks to the shield, compared to the other Chaos Furies of the other monogods. They get some physical resistance, then the armor is low, the melee defense is low, but the attack and the speed are very high. That's why they are very good against artillery pieces, to take down missile infantry and so on. But of course be careful, because when they will engage with another melee infantry, they will probably lose the fight. The Screamers of Tzeentch. This is another unit that witnessed many changes through the patches, and now is actually good. Before it was not. At the release of the game was not. Few years ago it was not, but now you can I think it's a valuable option for your anti-cav, anti-large department. There are these little beasts, not many entities actually in the group. Little armor, the speed is huge, but I mean quite the same as a generic cavalry, but slow for a flying units. This is important to state. Melee attack and melee defense are not that great, but I mean they are supposed to engage in combat only with cavalry. The weapon strength is armor piercing with the anti-large bonus, and the charge bonus is quite little. So send them against weak cavalry or even some heavy one, but in this case be a little more extra careful. They will do the job, but definitely don't engage with infantry because they will go down very soon. The Shrieking Sky Race are the Regimental Renown version, that is basically quite the same, a little better, with this ability that is called Lamprey's Bite. That is an explosion that they can cause that, I mean, in my experience at least, it is not that powerful. That's why, I mean, I don't think it's a great Regimental Renown, but I mean, it can add a little more of spice. Of course, if you haven't done it yet, please consider to support the channel with a like, with a comment, or maybe just subscribing. The Soul Grinder of Tzeentch. This is a very complex unit, so listen to me carefully. This is a huge monster Probably if you if you possess only the base game, it would be the only tanky option available, single entity tanky option available. It got plenty of armor. That is not something you can take for granted in the Tzeentch roster. The speed is more than okay, the melee attack and melee defense are great, the weapon strength with armor piercing damage and magical attack. This unit is great in melee. It's probably not the best soul grinder if engaging combat, but it definitely does its job very well. You can charge infantry and just protect other vulnerable units and so on. And then he got this range attack that is quite unique, that's why I have to explain it into details. He basically throw these spears, I think they are 5 or 6, that they are more suitable for cavalry. So you have a good range of 250, so you have all the time, to shoot at the cavalry, but it's even great against infantry. But if you want to shoot at infantry, you have to go on the side. Okay, you have to shoot from the side, and when you hit the side of the infantry, you will see that the spears will penetrate the formation and they will hit so many units that it probably is better against infantry than cavalry. Overall, a very nice and particular units that I think that every Tzeentch army should get. The Lord of Change. Now, I have mixed feelings for this unit. First, I don't think that it should be a unit. It's actually a good generic lord, a good generic lord, but as a unit it's just missing something, because it's supposed to be a flying monster, but it's not tanky. The armor is very little, the speed, is great, but overall the melee capabilities are very weak compared to all the other flying monsters in the game. With the technology, he started to get access to some very powerful spells, and for me this is the only reason to recruit it, because getting these spells with the multiple uses for free, of course when you advance with the technology, for free means that it doesn't require winds of magic. It's great, but this is seriously the only reason, because compared to other, you can just take the cockatrice in the other DLC if you want a flying monster, but they are better than Kairos because they see the present and not the future of the past. But yes, overall I don't suggest you to recruit. The Golden Griffin of Tzeentch is the regimentarian version, and in this case for me it's a more valuable alternative, because it got plenty of armor, since it's a Lord of Magic of Metal and not of Tzeentch, and the increased armors make the difference when it's engaged in combat, and it got even more melee attack and melee defense. Then the spells from the Lord of Metal instead of Tzeentch, that they are still very powerful, and overall for me it's a better option than the generic version. Let's start with the units introduced in the DLC Champions of Chaos, and the new Lord option is the Chaos Sorcerer Lord of Tzeentch, that get access both to the Lord of Magic of Metal and of Tzeentch. Now, unfortunately, the differences between him and the Herald of Tzeentch are not that many, and definitely not relevant. They both get access to the Flying Mount, not the Burning Chariot for the Chaos Sorcerer, but at the end they are still flying very fast. And in my opinion, the Chaos Sorcerer Lord is better, because first is more armored, and you can even upgrade the armor with the skill trees, and at that point it will be very hard for the generic melee infantry to take him down compared to the Herald of Tzeentch, even if the Herald of Tzeentch keep the missile attack, and then the Chaos Sorcerer can summon a unit of Chaos Pawn. When you reach a certain level with the Chaos Sorcerer Lord of Tzeentch, you will get the option to transform into a Demon Prince of Tzeentch, with some upgrades and some downgrades, at least in my opinion. First, of course, you become a very powerful flying monster without ammo piercing damage, and this is a factor that you have to keep in mind if you send it against a heavy infantry. For example, it will be very weak, it doesn't have a big armor, so it can fall down very soon. Of course, you get access even to some boosted magical ability that increase all the magical power and so on. But the selection of spells from both the Lord of Metal and Tzeentch is quite weird for me, and I don't like it that much. And then it got the demonic feature, so it will get the demonic instability, you have to be careful of the leadership and so on. The Chaos Sorcerer of Tzeentch is just the generic hero version of the Chaos Sorcerer Lord. It doesn't change that much, he still got access to the Lord of Metal and the Lord of Tzeentch, and to the disc that it will grant him the ability to fly, to move around the battlefield, to cast its spells. The Champions of Chaos DLC finally introduces some melee infantry for Tzeentch that are a little more defensive compared to the Forsaken, that as I said, they are the only option if you get only the base game. Let's start with the Marauders of Tzeentch with the shield. They have the Mark of Tzeentch, so they got access to the barrier, that is this magical protection for the very first attacks of the enemy, and then the magical attacks, so their attacks will be magical. Overall, their stats are not that great, but compared to other very early game melee infantry, they're actually not that bad. They can win most of the fights. They have the shield, so they will be more protected from missile attacks, but at the same time the armor is very weak, so you will recruit this unit only in the very early campaign. It's quite the same for the Marauders of Tzeentch with the spears. In this case, they sacrifice the shield and a little of melee attack to get additional melee defense and all the anti-large attributes like the charge reflection and the charge defense versus large, and the anti-large bonus, of course. They still have very little armor, so you will recruit them only in the very early campaign, but they are definitely a good option against the cavalry, against the monsters, even in the mid campaign. Actually, when you will start to fight with little beast, with some heavy cav, they can do quite a good job, and they can serve as your filler, okay, just to cover and to give this extra mid shield protection to your army formation. The Chaos Warriors of Tzeentch are the direct upgrade to the Marauders of Tzeentch with shields. They get better in any stats, especially the melee defense that got 16 points more, and the armor that reach 100, that actually for a mid-tier infantry is a lot, and they get basically immune to all the melee infantry without ammo piercing damage. The Chaos Warriors of Tzeentch with the halberds respect the same rules, so they are better except the speed in any stat, and they get together with all the anti-large bonuses, even the ammo piercing damage. That is great if you have to hit some big armored monsters or some heavy cav. The Chosen of Tzeentch will be your ultimate, most elite front line that you will ever get access to with the Tzeentch roster. They are very elite, they are very expensive, that's why probably you will not recruit many of them. They don't sacrifice the speed, but they get better at any stats. The same for the Chosen of Tzeentch with the halberds, that they don't get anything in particular more, they're just far better than Chaos Warriors of Tzeentch, but in any case I have to tell you that I don't think that they are that much worthy compared to the Chaos Warriors version, that when upgraded with the skill trees and so on, they do their job so good, so well, that you don't need the upgraded version that is of course far more expensive. And at the end we get the Severed Claw, that is a regiment and renown aspiring champions from the Warriors of Chaos, that basically are some Chosen of Tzeentch with the halberds, but with the increased attribute. They have an immense weapon strength, but they are only 16 entities. At the same time they have the Encourage ability that boosts the leadership of the units nearby. With this DLC, you get access to the Chaos Knights of Tzeentch with the Lances. That is the more shock cavalry version of the generic Chaos Knights of Tzeentch. They increase the charge bonus, but they sacrifice a little of melee defense. You will decide if it's better. In any case, it's just a reskin. You will get access as well to the Chaos Chariot of Tzeentch, that, they're just the normal generic chariots with the mark of Tzeentch, so they have the barrier and the magical attack, but yeah, overall you have just to use it as a normal chariot, so charge around the battlefield, then go away, then charge again, and so on. The Marauders Horsemen of Tzeentch are another reskin, of course, but at least they are a little more interesting. They are basically this skirmish missile cavalry that you can send around to shoot and distract the enemy, with the Warp Flame attribute that causes a weakness to fire and a reduction of the armor to the enemies, and then flaming damage, magical damage. Of course, you have to babysit them because they are very fragile, but if you like them, you can make a good use of them. Now here we are with my favorite unit of this game, of course not, the Spawn of Tzeentch, another reskin unfortunately. In this case they get the magical attack and the sundered armor, so basically they reduce the armor of the enemy they are engaging combat with. They have the unbreakable ability, so this unit will never suffer any form of leadership loss and they will never rout. So yeah, if you like. And if one version is not enough, you can get even the Regiment Aeronano version, called the Weird Spawn. That is basically an enhanced Chaos Spawn with the better melee attack, a better melee defense, and a physical resistance of 20. So they're just more sturdy and good at dealing damage. And the final single entity monster for this pack is the Chaos Warhammer of Tzeentch. That honestly I criticize so bad this unit in any of my videos, but at the end is not that bad. It's just a waste of money and you have no reason to recruit it. But if you need a tank, just this tanky unit with a couple of bonuses that in this case are the Giver of Arcane Glory that will boost the spell mastery of your wizards, and the favor of the Rhinos powers that is shared with all the other Chaos War Shrine that boosted the leadership of the allies units, and even the incorrigibility that boosts the leadership too. So it's a tanky support unit that of course is a very easy target for missile infantry, for example, because it's huge, it's slow, and so on. But you can try to use it and maybe you will have a little of fun. Of course, if you are considering to buy some of these DLCs, you can do it through the link in the description to Instant Gaming, so you will support a little this channel. Now let's talk about the units introduced with the last DLC of Tzeentch, Shadows of Change. Let's start with the Chaos Lord of Tzeentch, introduced with the second patch of the DLC. That is basically this very armored soldier, one of the only characters in this roster that they don't get access to spells, but of course you can increase the magical power of your army in some ways. He got some abilities that make him stronger in melee, and then is an anti-large focus character, so he will get the anti-large bonus, the expert charge defense, the charge reflection, and the good thing is that he got both the halberd, so with the armor piercing damage, but he keeps the shield to be more protected from missile the attacks that together with the missile resistance he makes it and of course the huge armor, he makes it a very hard target. Very nice, and yeah, with the disc it's very fast, and you can just move around and chase down cavalries and monsters, and even some mounted characters especially. The Exalted Hero of Tzeentch is just the generic hero version of the Chaos Lord of Tzeentch, that in this case he loses the shield, but he keeps the anti-large bonuses and the armor piercing damage. The abilities that he got access to are a little different compared to the ones of the Chaos Lord, but they're still very nice, and he can still get access to the disc, so just move around the battlefield to chase down monsters, cavalry, and the mounted characters, and I really like the model with the 3 heads. The first actual unit introduced with this DLC are the Zangors, that received many changes through the years, that's why it's very hard to position them. They are about the price between the Marauders and the Chaos Warriors. Compared to the Marauders, they are better at any stats except the melee attack, so they're a little more defensive, and the Chaos Warriors of Tzeentch are just better except the charge and the speed. That is crazy because means that they have less attack of the Marauders, but they get more charge, so you have to use it in an aggressive way, but at the end they are more defensive than offensive. In any case, they get of course the Mark of Tzeentch, the Woodsman, so they can pass through the trees, so they are better for the combats and the fights in the forest. They get the Vanguard deployment if you want to try to sneak around the back of the enemy and attack there, and then they get the ability called Arcane Change, where they get more weapon damage with all the spells that are cast by your wizards. And then of course they have the Primal Fury that grants immunity to psychology, speed, charge bonus and more melee attack. Overall they are funny to use and I like to build armies only with them, but yeah, they suffered so many weird changes that I don't know anymore what is the best way to use them. Changebringers. When they announced this unit, I was a little, you know, just a flamer on a disc of Tzeentch and you're calling a new unit, quite cheap. But then I started to use them and understood that they are very sick, they are so powerful. They're basically flamers without all the weaknesses of the flamers, because they are flying, they can move very fast around the battlefield, they have, then you know, they are still demons, they get the physical resistance, the strider, so they can move around the battlefield with no penalties of the terrain. Of course, you have very little ammunition, even here with the warp flame, so they reduce the armor, they increase the weakness to fire of the enemy with the magical attack, flaming attack, and then they get even the armor piercing damage that it's great even in the late campaign against you know, heavy armored melee infantry. You have very few ammunition, so every time you shoot, you have to think about that. You have to find the right position. You could even, you know, just send them into the vanguard and weaken the enemy before it starts the, you know, between the enemy army reaches your own army. And yeah, they are very crazy, but you know, they're just 10 shots, so use them very carefully. Centaurs of Tzeentch, another unit that when I heard about, I was a little disappointed, you know, it was quite cheap, they were just a reskin and not even a very good one, but when I started to use them, I got quite in love. They are basically Centaurs, so with all the attributes of Woodsman, the Vanguard deployment, the Primal Fury, and then the Perfect Vigor that I mean, it's great in this game, and still the Arcane Charge, so they're basically, their power is increased with all your wizards casting spells. And in any case, yeah, they are Centaurs with this barrier, with the magical attack, some armor piercing damage that it's not that common in the roster of Tzeentch, especially if you don't have all the DLCs. A lot of charge bonus, very fast. The melee attack and melee defense and the armor are quite low, so you have to be careful, but to charge and hit hard other cavalry, they're just perfect. The Cockatrice is an amazing addition to this DLC. I was expecting a flying monster for Kislev actually, but when I got the Cockatrice I was very happy. This unit is basically a flying monster that you can use to replace the Lord of Change when you get the DLC, because it's just better at the job but without the spells. The armor is not that great, but fortunately the melee defense is a little high for a flying beast. The melee attack is great with the magical damage and the poison effect that reduces some stats of the enemy, a good charge bonus, a lot of weapon strength with armor piercing damage, and then the missile resistance, some the chaos terror, so good to decrease the leaderships of your enemies, and then this petrifying gaze that is a hex that reduces the speed to the enemy of the enemies, and then they will be not able to move. That is great in case you are chasing down some you know, key unit of your enemy. In any case, it's a quite tanky beast that you can use to absorb damage or to hit very hard some characters, other monsters or cavalry. The Mutualith Vortex Beast, the single entity centerpiece monster of this package of Tzeentch, is an amazing colossal monster, very big, a lot of armor. The speed is good enough, is definitely not slow. Melee attack and melee defense are insane with the magical attack. The weapon strength is armor piercing, of course, and anti-infantry, so you should prioritize heavy infantry to attack. The charge bonus is not that great, and that means that is more a tanky monster that is supposed to absorb damage. Now, let's say that the animations of these monsters are some of the best in the entire game. Of course, he causes terror, he got some missile resistance, and then some abilities, for example the gift of mutation that increase the melee attacks of the allies nearby. Aura of mutation that causes damage to the enemies when it's engaged in melee, and then the tides of transformation, that is another direct damage to the enemy that reduces the speed, the melee defense and the melee attack. So overall a good both support and melee colossal monster that can absorb damage, can deal damage and do everything. And then the animation, the models are just insanely beautiful. Aeson the Fallen is the regimental renown version of the Mutualith Vortex Beast that many people say that it's worse than the generic version. In any case, the only main difference is this ability called the Maelstrom of Change, that is a chain axe, a kind of storm that you can use against your enemies. But I mean, beside that, not that much different, and honestly I don't like the colors compared to the normal version.